you.
Okay, subject is photographing water. So this was just a few, and I don't know, they're meaningful or meaningless, but I just couldn't resist the ones on the right. Just for those who don't know, that's from, one's Grand Tetons and the other one is Yellowstone, which all of us, I think, will miss that trip quite a bit. And the rest, I don't care, that abstract with the birds. Okay. Come on, baby. All right, new trouble. This won't play. What is play for these, for PowerPoint, F5?
All you have to do is hit the down arrow button.
I know, I did that.
Right.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so this, I'm going to kind of use this as a guideline to talk about different things and the way where water fits in and how to deal with them, maybe when you're talking about things such as landscapes, which is what most of us think about. Reflections and symmetry, moving water, I know that's always a big interest, especially to slow things down. What I call the impressionistic and abstract parts of what you can do with photography. Rain, which I called in the note, you know, rain can be your best friend when you're photographer, other than getting you and your equipment wet. Other than that, it's a good friend. And the special effects that you know, the drops and the splashes and all that kind of stuff. Anybody who's watched any commercials in the last year has seen the drops, the splash, especially the wine guys. They all love to have that splash with the wine. But anyway, we're going to start with landscapes. But because they all depend on it to some degree, the management of how much exposure you're getting into your camera. I wanted to talk a little bit up front about some of the technical things. And this would be along the following lines. So for anything that's moving fast, or we want to show the power of water, we're generally going to have a higher shutter speed and normal speed for the light that we're getting. And then we're going to want to show slow shutter speed. We want to create blurs. And just as a generalization, for if you don't do these kinds of things, you're going to want a shutter speed of probably a ½ second or slower. And it doesn't have to be a half, it could be a quarter, it could be 2/5, whatever it is. And then after that, it can go up to, I have some photos here I'll show you that I shot it up to 10 seconds. We also want to control the depth of field, which is going to be sometimes an issue when you're making other adjustments, and avoid quality compromises. So it's the usual stuff in photography. Take one out of column A and pay one out of column B, and that's the program we're going to be dealing with too. So these are tools that I think you should at least think about if you don't already own them, that are useful for water. Circular polarizer first. Another one called a neutral density filter, and then a graduated or split neutral density filter. Let's talk a little bit. And before you go spend any money, and just also to tell you that you have camera controls that'll reduce the light for slow shutter speed, which is the one that usually you end up having to buy filters for. So just to these are things you do when you take photos, but when you have your aperture wide open, which is the smaller numbers, you're going to get a faster shutter speed, you know that. But you're also going to get a fairly shallow depth of field. And if you're doing landscapes or anything like that, that won't work well, right? You want something that goes beyond 3 feet. The reverse, when the aperture is closed down, you'll get a slower shutter speed, which you want, and you'll get a long depth of field, which you also typically are going to want when you're out on doing landscapes or anything outdoorsy. ISO, you're going to get your best quality with a low ISO and a slow shutter speed. So that's right up the alley of what we want to do. And a higher ISO is just the reverse. So it turns out by using those two items with the aperture closed down, so that's going to be f16, f18, f20, whatever the heck it is on your lens, you'll get a slower shutter speed with a really long depth of field. So if you're doing water, you're going to use these a lot. And then the low ISO will give you the best quality with a slower shutter speed. Also, if you're doing water, especially if you want to slow things down, adjusting your ISO is a great way to go. And it doesn't cost you a nickel, right? You already paid for this stuff. It's in your camera. So start with a circular polarizer. So what does it do? It controls reflected light that's in the air. So the sunlight that comes scatters all over everything in tarnation. And what we see looks clear, isn't clear. There's lots of things flying around. So it will cut the glare out, and it allows us to see through shallow water or glass, which you cannot generally do with most any other filter. So what do I mean by shallow water? When you look at it and all you see are reflections of things, you can't see through the water, or you're photographing a building and there's a lot of reflections on the glass, you can't really see very well. A polarizer will help take care of that. It adds a lot of saturation to colors. So, I'll talk about it more. I love polarizers. And when I'm outdoors doing any photography outside, landscaping, that kind of stuff, it's on my camera 99% of the time. I don't take it off. It'll bring back definition in your bright subjects, and the price you pay for it, it reduces your shutter speed about 1.5 to 2 stops. So we'll talk a little bit more about what that comes back. That, by the way, isn't all bad. If you're trying to reduce shutter speed for slow down water photography, circular polarizer is a good way to go. This was a picture, just sharing this with you. I was taking some shots, just so you can see, these are 2 that I own, and I was shocked because they're both, I thought, the same densities for the optical light. The one on the right is much lighter, and the one on the left is, excuse me, I reversed that. The one on the left is lighter. That's a thinner polarizer, and I was trying to figure out later. It's a different brand, a different manufacturer, but it's an example of that the polarizers do have the capacity to reduce light. They are darker looking, and as it turned out, like I said, I was shocked to see visually how much difference there was in these 2 polarizers, but that's what it looks like. They're made up of 2 discs. There's a top one and a bottom one. What I call the outside piece, which is the top one is the one you have to turn to adjust. The inside piece screws into the lens itself. So the way it operates is you turn the adjustment ring until the viewfinder looks darker. It generally will work best at a 90-degree angle to the sun. It doesn't mean it won't work any other way, but that's where it works best. So there's 2 places you'll get the best reduction. The rest will not be as good. And if you're on the straight line with the sun, either looking to or away from it, it'll have almost no impact. Here's some of the bad news that people don't like to know about. It has to be readjusted every time the camera orientation changes. So if you're out operating and you're taking pictures this way and you've got it adjusted until it looks dark, and then you go over in this angle, you're going to have to readjust the lens. It doesn't feel good. Most people, I don't like it, but you have to do it. And one of the downsides when you you operate with these kinds of things, it's very, very easy when you're adjusting because to unscrew the filter from the lens at the same time you're turning the adjustment ring. You never think you're going to do it until you feel the thing slip through your fingers and it drops down to the ground and hits the biggest rock on this planet, and your filter is dead, right? So it's one of the things you have to be careful of. And like I said, if you're using it right, you're going to be adjusting it a lot. This is one of the things getting ready for this I discovered, and I'm guessing most people are the same way. I don't take a lot of pictures, almost none, where it would be with a filter and without a filter. I mean, if I think I need a filter, I put it on and I use it. That's it. So there's no before and after. So I was messing around here and I was just found a spot where actually I could see where it worked. Just give you a little demo. Very ugly photo otherwise. But the one on the left is it's a pier off a little dock. And you can see the water's, it's dirty, but it's also fuzzy. It's kind of, there is a glare on it. And then there's a distortion as you look down into the water at the leg. And on the other side, where I used a filter, the water is darker and a lot of the distortion is gone. You can see, and it was done on tripod, nothing else moved. But it just gives you an idea of what the polarizer can do when you're working with water. Okay. It also allows you to see through water. This was an attempt that did not work out very well, where I was trying to get very, very low on this lake. This is Lake Jackson, and I was trying to get very low on the lake to shoot across it. It was very windy, so there was no mirror-like effect on the water. And all those stones on the very bottom of this picture are underwater. They were all picked up because I was using a polarizer to try to cut through whatever I could of the water. It didn't work right as a photo, but I saved it only because I was curious about the stone business. Okay, Here now, this is not really so much as a water, again, a same lake, same place, but the sun went behind a little bit of clouds. I've used the circular polarizer, and these were the settings for it. It was 1,000th of a second, and you can tell the sun is intensely bright. It was a very bright day. It was only when the clouds covered up a little bit of it that I could get away with this. And you can also see the saturation in the sky. This got very, very bluish because I was using a polarizer, which is another reason I like to use it outdoors all the time. Okay, so for those of you who don't own one or you want to think about buying one, they're sold, priced by the filter size. And I mean by that, I mean the filter size that fits on the end of your camera lens. There's a ton of manufacturers. There's a wide variety of quality. You know, all the camera makers sell them, all the lens makers sell them, Hoya, Tiffin. There's European, Japanese companies that are wow on their quality. I think it's worthwhile to spend a little extra for quality on a polarizer. To me, I use it a lot, so for me, it's worthwhile buying the thing. When you're looking to buy, because they do get a little expensive, you're going to want to buy for what I call the largest regular lens you use. And what do I mean by that? When I'm out looking at when I'm landscape, water, whatever I'm doing, I'm outdoors typically. The lens, my go-to lens is a 24-70 lens that has a 77 millimeter filter size. So that is what I would call my largest regular lens. So if I were buying a polarizer, because I don't want to buy one for every lens I would ever use, I'm going to buy for the largest regular lens I use, and then I'll use an adapter, which is step-down rings, they call them, for lenses other lenses I have that are smaller. And I have a lousy picture here of what they look like. And I don't know if can you see this? Is this going to work? Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Anyway, the picture on the left is the top side of the adapter. And you can't tell in the photograph, but it's a 77 millimeter thread. And then it's flipped over on the right side picture, and you can see that the threading is way inside the other one. And this particular adapter is a 77 to 62 millimeter adapter, which just means I could put this on a 62 millimeter lens, put on the adapter, and then put a filter on it that's a 77 millimeter filter. The benefit is you can use that same polarizer on multiple lenses without having to buy new ones all the time. They're not the greatest things in the world to use. You especially don't like to do it when you're out in the field and you're twist and turn and stuff like that. Or if it's very cold, it's a very unpleasant process to have to twist, turn, and they get stuck. But you save a lot of money if you want to use adapters.
We do have a question, Jeff, if you're ready. Roxanne has asked there, put in there that she barely sees any difference, excuse me, when she uses her circular polarizer, and was curious of whether that's what she's doing or maybe the quality.
Well, it's probably more, I'm going to guess more about what she's doing. I mean, for starters, a circular polarizer is going to reduce the picture light by 1.5 to 2 stops. So it's going to darken the picture. And the way you set them up is you hold it up, you look through your viewfinder, and you turn the adjustment ring to get dark looking, the most dark you can. So you can point it at the sky, and you can look at it, you'll see the sky darken. If you're not at 90 degrees roughly from the sun and you do it, you won't get much of an impact, almost none. So those it's going to be, it doesn't matter that you're on. It still reduces the amount of light coming in, but it won't, there's no glare to cut. That's why it won't bother with it. Roxanne, if I didn't answer your question, ask it again with whatever it is you're looking for out of that, okay? All right, move on now to the light reducing filters. There's two ones to focus on. One is just plain neutral density filter. I'll show you one of them in a minute. It covers the whole lens and it reduces light over the entire scene. And then there's a device called a graduated neutral density filter, which reduces light over about half the scene. So, and they're not smarter. They didn't graduate from any place. It's just the way they're applied on the filter. They're both available with round screw-on filters, or if you want to buy a filter system, you can do that and use, they come with the rectangular filters or square, I guess some of them are, for the holder system. Both are measured in stops of light reduction. So filter nomenclature, I can remember years ago when I started getting involved in this stuff, looking into it, I was puzzled by the way manufacturers advertise and labeled their filters. And this is not the one at the time, but I found one that looked like this, and it helped me a ton. And the way you read the thing is, on the left-hand column, say if you want a one f-stop reduction in light, which is not much in the filter world, the optical density designation for that filter is 0.3, or it's a 0.3. They just call it a 0.3 neutral density filter. And the filter factor is 2, and that's the bottom of a fraction. So it's 1/2, and so it filters out 50% of the light. That's what all that means. So you can go down the list as far as you want. I mean, so a 5 will be labeled optical density of 1.5, and it filters out 1/32, or it filters out 97% of the light. Then you get to a 10, it's called a 3.0. And the factor in the arithmetic would be 124. And then there are people who call that an ND 1000 filter. So it's either a 10 f-stop reduction, it's a 3.0 optical density, or it's an ND 1000, but they're all the same filter. Okay? Are you more confused than when I started, or did that help at all? God, I wish I could see heads. It's very hard to talk to a machine. Okay. So anyway, so the neutral density filter reduces the amount of lights, period. You want it to reduce scene light and to reduce shutter speed, because that's what it is going to do, and it covers the whole scene. It's another one that's sold and priced by filter size, amount of light reduction. You buy it by individual filter strength, and the good news is they're always made, they have threads on one side, the male threads and female threads on the other side. So you can stack up 2 or 3 of them if you want. So if you bought one that was, say, a 2-stop, and you bought another one that was a 3-stop, you could have a 2, use the 2, you could use the 3, or put them together, and you'd have 5. Okay, so you can work them out anyway. There's also filters sold that are variable neutral density filters. They're 2 plates. They move. My understanding is they're actually very much like polarizers, and they twist and turn. You can get them up to pretty good speeds. I've never wanted to buy one because I started on the individual ones early, and I thought, I just don't want to duplicate what I've already done. But if I were starting fresh, I would definitely look at a variable neutral density filter. So that's helpful in the field. You only carry 1 filter. All right, this is what the 3.0 neutral density filter looks like on a piece of paper. You can see you cannot see through it. And you can't read it, but I'm looking close. This is from a company that's called, his name is B&W, which is a German company. I happen to like their filters, so those are the ones I usually buy. The diameter on this one is labeled, I'm reading from the left side around the curve. It's 77, I don't know what the 110 stands for, and then an ND30, so it's a 3.0 neutral density filter. You can see the next along, it says 10 BL, I'm assuming that's 10 stops. And these son of a guns are one of them that use that 1,000 times designation also. So they've labeled this 3 different ways to say it's a 10-stop filter. And by the way, the 1,000 times, another way of putting it is that 0.1% of the light available will actually go through the filter. 99.9 gets filtered out. So you get very little light through this thing. It also becomes a little bit of a challenge sometimes to focus. So here's a couple of pictures to just show the difference. On the left, okay, is a photo with no filter on it. It's just random settings. I didn't care what they were, but anyway, the shutter speed was at 1/2000th of a second. I put on the 10 stop, the 3.0 ND, left everything alone and just saw what would happen. Took the picture and then read what was the shutter speed. So with that filter, the shutter speed went from 1/2000th of a second to 1/6 of a second, just that one filter. Now, I'm not sure that I would want a photograph that looks like that, but if I wanted to slow things down, this is the baby that would do it. So this is this or smaller ones, but this is what happens, and this is what they look like.
Jeff,
Graduated.
is this the density you would want to use if you were taking a picture of like a solar eclipse, or is it
No,
more?
but actually, for the solar eclipse, I kind of went crazy because one, I didn't want to burn my eye out, and I wanted to make sure I had enough filter. So I ended up with, I purchased a filter for my largest telephoto lens that was 18 stops. So it was a 5.4 ND filter. And that one you could not see through, period. And the only way I had to focus it, sounds silly, but I put the camera on a tripod, put it on manual focus, looked for something in the distance, focused it to get it focused. And I had some painter's tape, which I very carefully put on the focus ring in the camera. So I couldn't move the focus ring once I got it all taped on. Then I put on the filter. And when I looked through the viewfinder, I could see nothing unless I got the camera pointed right at the sun. And I photographed the eclipse, and that did it with that setup. And it's challenging to do, because that's why telescopes have that little viewfinder thing on them, so they don't have to look through the telescope to find where in the sky everything is. But that's what it was. That's what it was. It was an 18-stop filter. Oh, and by the way, because I had to use it, was a 95 millimeter lens. It cost nearly $400. But the total eclipse of the sun is never going to happen again in my lifetime, at least anywhere near close.
So you have one for sale?
I have one. Actually, I have two. I have a 77 for sale too, if you want to buy it. Be cheap, because I'm never going to use it again. Okay, the ND filters, half filters the light, the other half is clear. They can be, depending on how you want to buy them, they can be gradually blended, which means it's more of a smoothish thing, or a hard line. So like people doing a lot of photography of water, and they want a very, very crisp line between the sky and the water, they might buy the hard line, because they want to preserve that size. Most other people like blended. Very commonly used at sunrise, sunset to block the sun while using a slow shutter speed for water. It's a two-piece filter. It's based on size and light reduction. And it's one of those, that would be my second filter to buy. So polarizer first, and then a graduated neutral density filter. Okay, here's a couple. Same kind of a deal, gives you a pretty good concept. Only half, roughly, of the glass is covered. The one on the left is a one stop. The one on the right is a two stop. I could put them together if I wanted to mess around, because then I'd be out in the field trying to figure out how the hell to get them synchronized, which isn't fun. I don't want to do that. Let's just put another one. But those, for most purposes, are things here that I just want to point out. There are two rings in it, so it turns. As you can see, there's the light side, there's a dark side, and then there's a little blob right there with that arrow that says mark ring for easy find to make adjustments. If you buy one of these things, the first thing, second thing you should do when you get home is find paint. My light, and it turned out to be opaque, but it's there. And I marked each side of that ring where it started and stopped. And therefore, when it's now, I'm out in the field and say sunrise, and it's pretty dark, it's pretty damn cold, and I'm trying to get the dark side of the filter positioned correctly. Instead of trying to look through the viewfinder and do it, which is more challenging than it sounds, I look for the little blobs of nail polish. I know where it is, and then I can set up my adjustments. So, little tip. Cheapo, I don't know, you don't have to use use whatever you want, but anyway, it worked. All right, this is a bad picture because I used the one stopper, but anyway, you could just see on the left side of the photo, I had it go vertical. But it's otherwise the exact same photograph. That had the neutral density filter on the left, the picture on the right had it on the right. There you can see it's a little bluer versus the one on the left. So it's the corner of the building, and then the sky is a little bit bluer. Generalizations. I would always vote for anything that is going to affect what goes into my lens to get enough, what I would call affordable quality. You don't have to break your bank, but get what you get the best that you can afford. Then I would say start with a circular polarizer. If you want to try one, you're not sure what you want to do, borrow one. I mean, there's plenty of people in the club that have these filters. I, for one, I've lent stuff to people. You want to try one of the neutral density filters or something like that, just borrow it, try it out once. You get it, then there's one other thing to be aware of, that when you stack filters on a wide angle lens, you get something called vignetting in the picture. You don't have to get it, but you get it. And to deal with it, you either have to take off the protective filter you put on your lens the day you bought it, right? That's would be something everybody should do. You bought the camera and the lens rather. You bought a filter, it went right on out of the boxes, and you preserve your lens forever. Sometimes you're getting vignetting, you have to take the thing off, or you could buy thin filters, which cost more money. But here's what vignetting is. You corner that's kind of blotched. That's the camera can see the rim of the filters. That's exactly on, and the stacking is usually the problem. Happens with wide angle lenses and when the lens is wide open, such as f2.8. So if you do it and you look at your photographs later and you want to kick yourself in the head and just, why did I open it all the way, all wide? Because now I'm going to have to crop out part of the picture to get rid of the vignetting. It happens to everybody. Just know it's going to happen if you want to use those kind of stacking things. Okay, actual photography, landscapes. You know, you all do it. You don't need me to tell you anything. I don't see there's any special treatment. Maybe accept exposure, and for that, I would always recommend you expose to the right on bright objects. So that's the little thing on the back of your screen that on your camera that shows you how your exposure is going. And if there's water in it and it's brighter than the other stuff around it, expose on the bright object so the rest of it does not get under or overexposed. The photographer has to choose, and you're going to have this comes to you all the time, whether to use it as a dividing line, a leading line, or something else. You can't choose, take pictures that use them all. And I'll show you a couple of examples of what I'm talking about. The rest of it, you're usually the same, and all you want to do is get the landscape in focus, zoom in, or get whatever part of it you want to emphasize. And again, a polarizer helps a lot with color saturation. So use one. Okay, this is what I just call a plain vanilla landscape. The only thing I actually liked about this, I mean, I had the lines leading on a small diagonal. To my eyes, when I looked at it, it looked like the clouds were getting ready to fight it out with this dirt, call it, with the ground. And that was my fanciful looking, I suppose, but there's nothing special. F13, 320th of a second. This one was a little different. This was an early morning. This is, I think, is Oxbow Bend in the Grand Teton. And unfortunately, the wind was not our friend, and you can see the lake, or not, excuse me, not the lake, the river was not reflecting well. It had a lot of ripples in it, so that we could not get any kind of reflection that way. Against the diagonal of the lake, or not the lake, the river coming in. I don't know how well it
Hey,
worked.
Jeff, you just locked up there for a minute, so we lost about the last 10 seconds of what you were saying.
Okay. I was just saying the way I framed this thing was just to get diagonals in it. So the river is one of the diagonals moving from the lower left up, and then the trees and the mountains are the other diagonal, and they came together as a V. And like I said, the real goal I wanted was getting reflections, and that bombed out because it was too windy. It was also very cold, I will tell you. So reflections and symmetry. So again, water acts like a mirror if it's not disturbed by the wind. So, and it's one of those things, you're going to go out and try to get those mirror shots. It's like getting up for sun. You have to go, and then you. This is another one for reflections and symmetry. The photographer has to decide on the placement of the reflection line, what I call it, or the water line. And it's, you can either, use the ruler thirds, center it, turn it upside down, do whatever you want to do. And just remember, when you start getting now, you're going to be doing some longer exposures. blurs and long exposure, they're both good and bad. I mean, the good part is you're trying to get something blurred. The bad part is things around it that you don't want blurred will blur if the wind blows. So you have to be at least a little bit alert to what's around whatever you photograph, with the idea if you're using a long exposure and there's a puff of wind, all those little leaves will move and shake and stuff, and it gets very hard to get a good photo. So here's a couple, or three, whatever it is. The one on the left was sort of a symmetry thing. You can see at me, I let the water line go straight across to the side, and I'm okay with that. I mean, other people may not like it, but I'm okay with it. It got sort of a crazy look with the pink sky being reflected in the water. And obviously there was no wind. This water was reflecting really. The one on the upper right call, I was kind of seeing the boat and the way the thing was constructed. Decided to just let the boat be symmetrical and not worry about what thirds, ups, downs, or anything else. The one on the lower left or lower right, that's down in Key West. I don't remember, Fort Kendrick, or something like that. And this one, I both got a good reflection out of the water, and it got that, what do they call that? The pitching point in art, where you get the construction of the real fort and then the mirror of it down on the bottom, and it comes to a nice vanishing point. And the only thing that would really make that picture 10 better would be if there was a model standing on that rock on the lower of the thing. But anyway, that's one anyhow. So to me, for reflection, symmetry, people, how do you do it? What do you get? There's a lot of luck. I mean, the stuff like with, were just, whoa, what is going on around here? I just looked at the thing. Don't be hung up on guidelines about what's best for horizons. It's, everybody will have their books that says you should follow the rules of thirds and all that kind of stuff. If it looks good, use it. If it doesn't, use something else. Take a lot of the photos. That's always my view. Put it in the thirds, put it in the center, put it there, put it there. Just move it around and just take a bunch. The digital storage is cheap. You can throw them away later. And again, circular polarizer to minimize glare, maximize saturation. So here's a couple others now that was same kind of a deal. The one in the upper left was in Georgia. That whole area in the foreground is water, and that is entirely a reflection, which in a small picture looks overwhelming, but it looked good when I was taking the picture. And in the large size photos, it comes out a lot better. The upper right, where the heck is that? That's Lake Yellowstone. Same kind of a deal, and that strip of dark through the center is whatever, dirt or something. And to me, that just made it a natural for keeping it centered right through the middle, and I wasn't worried about, thirds, twelfths, or anything else. It was just the way I was going to do it. And the bottom one was a big panel I did of Lake Jackson. And you can see here, this I had to slow it. And the purpose was to try to get the little teeny waves that is on to get a little bit smoother. So, I could have shot this thing and it would have been easier to make the panel if I would have used maybe a little bit higher ISO, not higher, but to get my shutter speed up. So I would have, could have used a higher ISO and maybe an F18 or F20, whatever. It would have made my life simpler, but I wanted to try to smooth the water, and I somehow got it smooth just enough to get a decent reflection. It's not a good one, but it was a decent reflection. And these are the judgments every photographer is making all the time when they're out there doing them. So, but you can always remember the water's a little rough, get the shutter speed down a little bit, make sure you're using a tripod in this case, and then take your picture. And a lot of times you'll get it smooth enough that you can catch the reflections. Okay. Large light differentials. So that just means typically is bright sky, dark ground. You can't get one exposed right without the other one getting. For those, you need to use a graduated neutral density filter. Screw it on or hold a plastic filter in front of your lens. You need, I call it, you need, I think, use a tripod, especially when you're adjusting that ring on the outside. And that's why, you know, you mark the edges. Because if you're in the dark at 6 in the morning and it's cold, you will really regret. You can't find where the neutral density filter works. You have to recompose the photos so the portion that is covering the bright light is indeed covering just the bright light. That's one disadvantage of the circular filters. They're kind of fixed. You just readjust. You may have to recompose, change what you're looking at a little bit. Bright sunny days are the biggest creator of these differentials between the sky and the foreground. And it's just really clear that when you expose for bright, the dark is ruined and vice versa. And sunrise and sunset are the biggest causes of these problems. So if you like to do sunrise and sunset, there's going to be a split neutral density filter in your future. So here's an example of the light differential. This was very early in the morning.
We lost you for about 10 seconds there again.
What's that?
We lost you for about 10 seconds there again.
Oh boy, okay, sorry. Anyway, I was just saying, I don't remember the name of these falls. It doesn't matter. Anyway, it was early in the morning. The sun was starting to come up and the water area and the trees behind it were really brightly lit. And my goal was to try to make sure I got as much of the foreground in the picture as I could and get it in focus. So I wanted to use a fairly closed down aperture. So this was on a tripod. It was an f/16 because I still wanted the blur that's through this picture. Camera can go down to an ISO one, so I use it extra time on the shutter. This particular one I was with somebody who had plastic, you know, the rectangular ones, graduated neutral density filters release, and I just held the plastic paper filter in front of my lens and moved it up and down until it darkened the area that was bright that I wanted to darken, and pow, shot the picture. This was one shot. I didn't know, you know, we didn't know, and the sun was coming up. It was going to get ruined very fast if I didn't get something quick. Came out fairly decent, I thought. You can see, and the stones in the front are in, they are in good focus. All right, I'm jumping the gun. This is going to be an outing I saw in whatever it is, a month or a couple of weeks. So this was one the club did of 2 years ago. Bill arranged this, I think. And it's of the Dames Point Bridge and it's shot from the ready point. And I did it only just to show you what a couple things. One was, you know, this was a 2-stop graduated neutral density filter that I had on. Set it for f/16 1/80th and the ISO of 200. And I put the time on here just so you understand when you're doing anything with the sun or the moon for that matter, both move really fast. You don't have a lot of time for stuff. And I timed this. I was very anxious that I get the point where just before the sun broke the horizon of dark. And that's why there's like an area of brightness, but that's pre-sun coming up. And I almost hit the jackpot. There's a truck crossing the bridge. And I just missed it just a teeny little bit. So here is the same pose 2 minutes later. And by then I went up to f/18s. The speed went to 112.50. Again, I had the filter on. And this is what I mean by about the sun moves fast. You don't have much time to do stuff. And I clearly wasn't positioned right. Everybody wanted to have the sun coming up right with the bridge lines come together. And we're just off a little bit. But it's a challenge to get in to photograph the sun, and you need filters if you're going to do the sun. Also, so you don't ruin your eye. Moving water, okay. If you're going to do water sports, so like whatever, boats or surfing, any of that kind of stuff, you're going to need full shutter speeds. You're going to have to stop the motion that's moving fast. Or if you want to show what I call a power of water, that's water crashing into things, big waves, any of that kind of stuff, fast shutter speeds. So but what you also are going to need is some depth of field. And so the big adjustment for me is always then use ISO to adjust get the shutter speed I need. And if you can maintain it, you're outdoors, it's sunny, it's light, there's going to be a lot of glare, especially around water, use a polarizer. If you got it and you can maintain the shutter speed, use it. So here's what I mean by full speed. This is, I don't know, Sisters of the Sea surf contest a few years ago. By the way, Jim Brady is the guy, he's probably forgotten more than I have ever known about this stuff, but you had to use a pretty fast shutter speed. I always try to shoot these characters, and a lot of them are fun to photograph. So I'm getting their face or something like that. So I shoot them coming towards me. This was done off the pier because it was very early in the morning. The sun was to the left, and he could see the sun lighting up his back. And later in the afternoon, the beach becomes the better place to shoot because the sun is back, and you can not be shooting into the sun. The upper right-hand corner was a washing notes expedition. We went for sunrise. And again, this was just the rocks being pounded by waves. That did have a split density filter used to keep the sun reasonable. The bottom one was a river out west. And again, it's one of those, roaring by, lots of white caps. And again, the speed on there was 320, 1/320th. So again, that was pretty much, I wanted speed. I wanted to capture the motion of the water. Freeze it is what I was trying to do. Slow-mo, it's just the reverse. Anything that water moves, that's got bubbles, froth, waves, you name it, can be photographed with a slow shutter speed to create a soft to creamy appearance. Really popular with waterfalls. This is what lots of people want to do. Not that hard. You need a shutter speed of around a half second up to whatever, 30. And you absolutely have to have a tripod because you're doing such a slow shutter speed. I found you could, with a circular polarizer plus your freebie camera adjustments, you can often come very close to getting to the shutter speed you want, or then otherwise use a neutral density filter. And you also, again, as I'll just point out, because this is by the voice of experience, because I've done it many times, what I call the unintended consequences, such as a puff of wind which blurs all the greenery, and you get your beautiful, smooth water just got ruined because all the flowers are out of focus and look blurry. It becomes a lousy photo. So just be aware of what's around you. Waterfalls, just one other point about those, or multiple points. They provide a lot of opportunities. So you can do the entire falls, for around our part of the world. You can get the whole falls. You can do partial falls, pieces of it, the bottom, the middle, the top, downriver streams, odd configurations, and all the rest of that stuff. The real message is look around. You got to walk up and down and just take a peek. Is there a better place? Can I get something here? The positioning of the camera changes the colors of the water in the photo. So if you're shooting into a dark area where a lot of waterfalls seem to be, you're going to have a bluish looking water instead of the normal colors, but they also gives you an opportunity to have foreground, leading lines. So to me, it's look around, choose safe, and just remember, because the club has gone to Brevard, I think twice for multiple days. And I know I could name on two hands people who slipped into the water, starting with me. I went in twice. And there's other people who slipped in. And I remember, I don't know if he's on the call here, but one guy, he almost slipped, he's going to fall, his whole body was going to go into the water. Those rocks are just slippery buggers. You have to be very careful around them. Okay, this is Gibbons Falls. This is an example, like I said, I like to get foreground. I like to position where the falls are. This is in Yellowstone. And it was one of those where you can't see it from here, but if you walk around, there was a walkway that went up the left side, way up in a parking lot and stuff. The vast majority of people never left the parking lot. And there was an overlook there, and they were snapping pictures and all that kind of stuff. And this is cute, but wonder what else they have. Walked down, and someone had given me a heads up. He goes, walk as far as you can walk. We did, and this was the view we found. So this was absolutely one go look. And like I said, I like the foreground. I think it frames the thing pretty well. Other people may not. That's your choice as a photographer. Western Florida, Sewanee Falls, where we went with the railroad bridge. This was another one where, again, this was to kind of position the falls where it sits. It's not a very big flow of water. And this one I did for an 8-second exposure, which is long for me. I don't tend to like to do 8-second exposures. But you can see the way I forced it down was I had a closed down aperture. I used f/16, and I used that 31 ISO. So that got me a long way towards my 8 seconds. And I'm sure I used a neutral density filter to get it down the rest of the way. This is in Brevard. I think this was called the Mill Falls. I don't really remember. And this is, again, to me, the falls are interesting. I like to get something else in the picture, and this lent itself with the mill house red. Much slower, even though the water looks very blurry. It was only 1.6. Same deal though, closed down aperture, low ISO, and get what you can out of it. That was an interesting place to visit. Okay, the partial water. This you can't tell from the picture because I was actually just off to the side there, but that from the top to the bottom is about 3.5 or 4 feet. That's it. And it was rushing down these rocks. It was going, super fast, making a lot of white color. And so I was able to back off. It's still a 2-second exposure, but it didn't have to close down as much, and the ISO was much higher. So that was just so I didn't go over on my timing of the exposure. And a couple other examples. The one on the left.
Jeff, you were a little bit behind in terms of the slides advancing, so you're just now in the one right after the Mills Falls.
Okay, the backwards one?
No, you're just, they weren't there. Your slides weren't. Now you've got the two side by side.
Okay, so sorry, folks.
That's all right.
The one on the left is another example of, it was a little piece of a bigger falls, the Mills Falls. And that top to bottom is probably about 2.5 feet on the one on the left. And then off to the river is another 3 or 4 feet. And it was just the positioning. I liked it. It kind of mirrored the wall of the little, whatever you want to call it, rock outcrop, and then the slab of stone sticking out. So that's, I don't know. Anyway, very easy to shoot these kinds of things. And it got very creamy look with the 3/10 of a second exposure. It worked well. And the one on the right was in Brevard, a different place. There's my point about the water looking bluish. This was something that was almost entirely in shade, the water coming down. And it changed the color of the water. And so everything I adjusted down, I didn't need to go for the same kind of length of anything.
Do you ever have trouble with the water blowing out when you slow it down that much in the white?
Yeah, what I do is, if it starts to blow out, I reduce everything to get the shutter speed reduced. So in this case, what I would have done would have been to raise the aperture, the f-stop up to maybe f/16 or 11. I don't know what it would do, and or raise or lower the ISO, so that would reduce it too. I take multiples. I mean, so I take one, I look at it. If it's no good, I start adjusting things. That's it. I mean, I don't know of a formula that says use this for this. It just kind of, I want to slow it down. I want the creamy look. And I look at them later, and some of them, like I did, and another was a 10-second photo, and I didn't like it. It looked lousy. But there's no way to judge until you take the picture, is my experience. Okay, downstream. So this is where now the falls, they've done their thing, the water's dropped, this big splash, and then you look downstream. This to me is always very interesting for a couple of reasons. One is the water follows very different patterns. It's flowing generally somewhat horizontal, though downstream. And you get stuff in there, you get debris. In this case, it had these leaves all over the place, which added a great color. And usually the stones start getting smoother. You get a very different kind of a look. But so this was a 4-second photograph. And this was Looking Glass Falls in Brevard. And you could see I had the, the lens stopped down quite a bit to f/18 and a very low ISO to get what I wanted out of it. This is downstream at the Suwannee River. This was another one when I talked about you need to walk around. This was me. I walk around, I take a look, and I was looking for patterns in the flows or anything I could spot. And I walked down, I found this little section downstream where I thought I was just entertained by the way the water kind of curved around the rocks. And I call the dappling of lights. To me, that it's just something I get a kick out of. I did to take a picture of it. And this was your point about blowing the water. We didn't want to do that. So you can see I backed off on the ISO, and the shutter speed is just, slightly over half a second. So it's not a fast shutter speed. This water that I remember was very foamy. And so you got the white without doing much. You didn't have to slow it down as much. Yeah, that's Suwannee River. It was an interesting place. Oh, here's the one. This was in Georgia. And I was trying to see how a 10-second exposure would come out. Same deal, stop down the aperture, ISO as low as it would go, and set it up for 10 seconds. I'm guessing I also had a neutral density filter on to get to 10. And later on, I thought this was funny. It was like a bridge for ants or something across this little stream. It would be cute. Anyway, when I got back, I wasn't really fond of it, but it just, goes to show you can do whatever you want with couple of filters just to look around. I just walked till I found this section. Okay, oceans and waves. You get the same slow the shutter speed down program going on here. I think it's better when the waves are running into something like rocks, piers, driftwood, whatever it is when you name it. So they're coming into shore. Whether the photo water on the way in or the way out is your choice. I found outflowing water is often slower and forms very, very interesting patterns in the sand and the rocks. So it's kind of like coming in, big waves, pound the pier, going out, look low, and also shoot low, get your body down. So here's an example of, it was very slow. This is Washington Oaks. And this was to slow down the waves, but they're coming in, they're pounding the rocks. And I stood back just in case you're interested. I found the appearance of these rocks fascinating. It looked like some, what the thing, the dinosaur giant had taken big bites out of the rock. Kind of silly sounding now, but anyway, that's what it kind of looked like. And then behind it, you can see the waves are smoothed out because it was a slow exposure time. This is the reverse. This is also Washington Oaks. And it was kind of, I'd watched the wave come in, and then as the water went out, I was watching the patterns it would make, and I thought this would be pretty interesting. You look at it for a little while if you're standing there, and you get a feel for the pattern of the waves, how they come in. There'll be one that'll come in really deep. It'll be a long wave, start to go out, another one crashes into it, and they're not very photographic. And you need one that goes in, and then there's enough time to have it go out and form those patterns. Whatever it is, I just like them. And, to me, it just, horizon is a little low, and that was animated. I took different pictures. This was the one I liked, ones I took. Okay, Rain Friend. This is, what is this thing called? Galley, and this is Baton Rouge. This was from the club trip over. And this is the house front and way that goes all the way out to the levee of the Mississippi River. Call it Oak Alley, those big oak trees. Anyway, it rained in the morning. And to me, rain makes everything look better. Once the sun starts coming about, to me, they look greener, their grass looks greener. You can see there's little wet spots on the bricks, so it puts a little definition into the bricks. And everybody else, I think in the group was behind me. They were photographing farther back, and the only people out was this tiny wedding party, and I think they had a videographer there. I don't remember now exactly, but they add perspective. I mean, you get a sense of how big that building is when you see these small-looking people there. But this is my point about Ranger Friend. I don't think I would have tried this without rain, because it really perked up the colors and the bricks. Another example, like rain is your friend. This is over the deck to chairs. And you can see this is not a good one, but there's a reflection on there, picking up the colors and reflecting it off. Most of the deck to chairs are in gravel or grass. It's hard to get reflections off of them, but this was one. And I always look, I mean, I'm the person that if it rains, I'm the one, I'm going to go out and take a look at some of this stuff and see what I can shoot. The other one, by the way, for something like deck to chairs is when it rains, the families don't come, there's no little kids running around. So I'm not insulting little kids, but if you're trying to photograph without them in your way, go out when it's raining. Impressionistic, this was another one. This was serendipity. It was, this is also in Brevard. And they had a hatchery there for fish. And this was the stream that got released into. And fishermen were allowed that the fish, they had to throw it back, catch and release. I'm wandering around. I didn't know anything was there to photograph. And I stumble on this guy. I look through, there's a stand of trees and I can see him in there. And I'm just wowed by the reflections behind him. I mean, it's the little bit of waves and a leaf, you know, the reflections of leaves. I don't know if it was a tree or just loose leaves, but anyway, I loved it with the colors. He did not want to be photographed. And then I finally said, would you mind if I, no, I guess I'm okay. I'll probably break your camera, haha. So, and I had a camera at the time with a flash on it. And I was going to pop it up and take his picture with a flash. And I said, I was pressing my luck. He'd probably get PO'd at me. Anyway, I liked it. And I had a paid a friend paint something from this once. I like playing around. This is one of my favorite kinds of things that just kind of add a little thing, but I don't know what you want to call it. I call it impressionistic. This is holiday lights over a swimming pool. And so the top part are the real lights, the bottom part are the reflections. And it was 3 second, it's a zoom where I just pulled in on the zoom as I was going. I saw Wayne Wright's on here. See, I think I actually showed him this once. I came back and stopped him and said, I'm going to get a picture of this stuff in chairs, rain. And you can see on the street there that you get tremendous reflections when it's raining in that pavement. So I was taking them, and it was. Then I decided I was going to do a goof around picture, and I don't remember exactly how I did this. I think I had a tripod. It was a 4 second exposure I wrote, and I had it on a tripod. Fired the shutter, and then I counted probably to 2 or 3, and then picked up the tripod and the camera in one whoosh to get those little curves. And interesting. It was not a good enough picture to do anything with. It's not in focus, but I love the way it looks. I was going to go back and do it some other day when it was rainy. Also, by the way, the rain started blowing in the wind. That's another time to get out of Dodge if you're not out in the rain because your camera gets wet.
You're breaking up a little bit there, Jeff.
So, hello.
You're back. You're back. Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
There you are. You're back on your screen. But I guess the first part, are there any questions?
We have one in here. It's what are you doing for your shooting? Are you doing aperture, priority, manual? What do you typically do when you're shooting water?
Good question. I either use aperture priority or I use all manual. And where the light is tough to figure out, I use manual exposure and adjust, just like I talked about. So I move ISO around, I move the aperture around. I use the exposure compensation controls. I mean, that's 2 or 3 stops of light you can mess around with until I get the light meter looking about where I want it. Then I take a picture and see if it came out okay. But other than that, I mean, aperture priority would be the easiest one I would use.
Okay, I would invite everybody to go ahead and take their mic off mute if they want to ask a question. Another question came in is, do you use a tool aid for timing and exposure, or do you just do multiple trial and error and like photo pills or something else when you're trying to do the exposure?
I don't. I have a meter, and I'm always too lazy to pack it and carry it. But it's just over time from exposure, I've kind of learned you know, what generally is going to work. And if it's dark and I want a slow shutter speed, I know from experience I'm going to use a closed down aperture, and it'll be f16, f18, f20. The lens I usually use goes as a maximum of f22. And I'm aware of that. I don't want to go all the way to the end because then it adds new distortion into the picture. So I try to stop myself at f20. And then the other is I'm going to add in on ISO. Generally, I'm going to knock it down to 31. And then I look at the light meter in the camera and start fiddling with it. And when the light meter shows proper exposure, then I'll take a picture and I'll look at it. And I'll look at the, someone help me. I'm trying to remember the, what's the little light, the light thing in the, on the back of your camera.
Histogram.
Histograms.
Look at your histogram and make sure you're exposing to the right. And then you know you're going to have a good picture.
Any other questions?
Not at this point.
Is this too easy, too hard, or just not what?
No, it's all good information. I would add one thing because you don't use the variable NDs. What I found with the variable NDs is instead of having to mess with aperture, if you want to change shutter speed, you can just rotate the ND and go a stop at a time, and that can be convenient.
Yes, that's very true.
Now, another point I wanted to make, I've just had experiences on ultra wide lenses, say 24 and under, 24 down to 16. Using a polarizer, you get a real differential between the ends of the picture on it. It just changes the light in the continuous tone areas of the sky. It tends to be much more effective or over effective in the ends of the exposure, particularly when you're doing a panorama, when you're blending. I just have got to the point now where I won't use a polarizer on a 21 or 20 millimeter lens any longer.
Well, that's interesting. I don't use them typically on those, say a 20. I use, like I said, my go around, the camera I have on my hands most times is the 24-70. And the polarizer works very well with that. You know, I don't get the extremes you just described, but if I got them, I would absolutely discontinue use. I wouldn't do it with those kinds of things.
I've stopped.
And the other would be to see the size. I would look also, I'd check whether you could borrow one of the same size and see if another copy of a polarizer has the same effect. Maybe it's the polarizer you own. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying that's something I would check.
It's because of what you said, Jeff, where it's got to be a 90-degree angle. So with these super wide lenses, the angle tends to change as you go to the outsides.
That's true. That would have a bearing on it. So you're probably right. You shouldn't use it on the real wides.
One of the things that I have, Jeff, that works relatively well for when you want to do like sky is I have a mount on the front of my lens for the rectangular filters, the graduated filters. So you can just move those up and down until you get the shading the way you want it. So those work pretty good. Have you ever tried one of those?
I've used them. I've borrowed them. I don't own one. And that one photo I showed you that was of the falls, it was a Lewis Falls that I couldn't remember the name before, that was done using one of those, but it wasn't in a holder. I held it in my hand and I moved it up and down on front of the lens until I got it where I wanted it. And then I took the picture. So that's something I've thought about, is buying one of those or two of them and just throwing them in my bag. And then that would be my graduated neutral density filters.
Well, I have some if you want to borrow them, and I also have the different size rings for the adapters for the different size lenses too. So you can try those if you like.
All right.
Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Jeff. This was a great talk. I think I learned a few things. Does anybody else have any comments they want to make?
No, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Time for the
Right.
bar? I mean, is that what's going on now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's right.
yeah. We're gonna have a virtual happy hour.
Virtual happy hour.
Thank you, Jeff.
You're welcome.
Just so
Thank you,
folks
Jeff.
know.
That was great. Perfect.
Yes. Thank you. And I will I will put the recording out on YouTube probably tomorrow.
Thanks, Jeff.
Very good. See ya.
Have a good evening, everybody.
Yep.
All righty. Where are we?